As more and more young musicians passed through the Marshall shop, there was always one question.
Do you know, we couldn't have do with amplifiers. You don't do amplifiers, do you?
Jim finally relented and began to stock amplifiers. But as he had long feared, the reliability of British amps was suspect.
And they kept on going wrong. And he offered me the job as a repairman.
Just as with Jim, Ken was up with all the things that were going on.
As well as being a trained wireless mechanic, Ken knew exactly what bands craved most.
All the kids wanted a lot more power, and the only amp that was really around was the Fender Bassman. The Bassman was designed for a bass guitar really, but the guitarist found that the Bassman was giving a beautiful guitar sound.
The Fender amps were fine sounding amplifiers, but they tended to, they didn't distort. They had a very clean kind of surf music sound.
Pete kept on at Jim to give him an amplifier like the Bassman at the price that everybody could afford.
And one of the guys who worked in the store, who was Mick Borer, he had one, and he brought it in for Ken to have a look at.
You know, I can remember the chappie turning up with the Bassman on the back of his bike. There we had a really good look at it to see what made it tick.
Ken soon discovered the Bassman used a generic circuit with no patent restrictions.
That inspired Jim. He decided there and then he was going to build a rock and roll amplifier.
I said, well, if you're capable, Ken, let's have a go at it.
I was a repairman, but we needed a designer.
Ken approached young friends at his local amateur radio society. Help came from the 19-year-old electronics wizard, Dudley Craven.
We built our own chassis around the Bassman layout.
We then took it out, the basic chassis, brought in the Pete Townsend and a couple of other guys and said, crank it up.
When I first heard Jim's amplifier, I felt it was almost loud enough, but it didn't have the zing of a Fender amp, so I kind of chucked it back at him.
Every time we modded the amp, we put it in the shop and let the guitarist try it.
Pete would say, I need more growl in this.
Ken and Dudley made one important change to the Bassman spec.
We found by changing that first valve to an ECC83, suddenly the amplifier was giving a nice distortion sound.
The sound that it produced, it wasn't like a Fender amp, but on its own terms, it worked brilliantly.
I wanted distortion that was happening in the amplifier, not in the speaker, but in the amplifier.
Electronic engineers always wanted to get rid of distortion, but we knew that was the sound we wanted.
It wasn't just a loud amplifier, it was an amplifier that would fold in distortion.
Eventually, he came up with a sound that I said, that's the sort of sound the boys have been talking to me about in the shop. And that's how the Marshall sound was born.
That was it. Pete said, I want it.
Ken Brand was willing to make what every other amplifier maker in the world would have called a bad amplifier.
What it says is that Jim, Ken and Dudley Craven, when they put the unit together, designed it and built it, they got it right first time.
Marshall No. 1 has survived, and it's now one of the most revered relics of rock.
We've had a couple of blank cheque offers, we've had a couple of really silly offers for it, but it's the beginning of Marshall.
While the inspiration was very clearly from Fender, what ended up coming out of the shop at that point, one way or another, by design, by accident, through necessity, what have you, ended up being quite different.
On the first Saturday, when we put the chassis in the shop, I think we sold 25 units the first day.
With over 50 watts of peak power, Jim boasted the JTM45 was now the loudest guitar amp in the world.
And all of a sudden, there's this monster 50-watt amp with 4 speakers, even eclipsed the Fenders.
In the next episode, with Jim's order book full, the new Marshall Amplification company hits its first problem.
Jim was selling these amps like hotcakes, and I was the only one there to build them.